Mr. Chairman, H.R. 7187, the so-called Protection of Women in Olympic and Amateur Sports Act, is a cynical and dangerous measure. This bill would force the national governing bodies, or NGBs, of various amateur sports to adopt exclusionary transgender policies or face losing their status as an NGB in their respective sport. This legislation is yet another ugly attempt by Republicans to bully an already vulnerable minority of trans youth athletes for political gain. To begin, this legislation is a solution in search of a problem. The International Olympics Committee has permitted transgender athletes to compete since 2003. Yet only a handful of trans athletes have ever been qualified for an Olympic event, and the U.S. has only ever sent one transgender woman to the Olympics as an alternate who ultimately did not compete. Under the current system, NGBs determine their own inclusion policies, which vary from sport to sport and which continue to evolve. For example, boxers are not subject to the same transgender inclusion policies as equestrians. Indeed, USA Boxing recently announced that trans women are eligible to compete in women's events, but they are subject to the most stringent requirements of any sport with a documented policy. NGBs and the people closest on the ground on this issue should be left to develop fair and inclusive policies. They do not need Congress to interfere, especially a Republican majority more interested in fear-mongering and demagoguing than actually protecting women. This bill would have us replace transgender inclusion policies that are currently determined on a sport-by-sport basis with a one-size-fits-all ban. MAGA Republicans may crow that they have excluded a handful of trans athletes from amateur athletic competitions, but they will not have improved the lives of any of the competitors. This blanket ban may appeal to the Republican MAGA base, but it has no basis in fact, performance outcomes, or basic human decency. In fact, a blanket ban on transgender women athletes will harm all women and girls who participate in amateur athletic competitions. This bill would likely lead to invasive screening procedures to verify an athlete's gender. This is particularly concerning considering the various sexual abuse scandals afflicting sports, like that involving Larry Nassar, a doctor for the U.S. women's national gymnastics team who pled guilty to offenses relating to the sexual abuse of minors, and whose case is considered one of the worst sexual abuse scandals in sports history. The invasive screening invited by this bill would potentially create opportunities ripe for abusers. Spare me the Republican crocodile tears about protecting women and girls in sports. If Republicans were truly interested in protecting women and girls or ensuring equal opportunity, they would address the real barriers to women's equality in sports rather than targeting trans women and girls to further their political agenda. A recent report by the Women's Sports Foundation found actual verifiable barriers to women's and girls' sports equality, including a lack of financial resources, gender role stereotypes, vulnerability to abuse, and workplace bias and wage gaps. Notably missing from the list, the inclusion of transgender women. This legislation's effects on women's and girls' amateur sports alone is reason enough to oppose it. Yet the negative impact of this bill is not limited to a subset of elite athletes and amateur athletic competitions. It would also cause additional harm to the small, vulnerable community of trans youth athletes that have already been bullied out of scholastic sports by the MAGA Republicans in control of red state legislatures. If passed, this bill would lead to a trickle-down effect throughout an NGB's network of amateur associations and sponsored competitions. Because nearly half of all states already categorically ban trans women and girls from scholastic sports, trans youth will be denied the last avenue to organize athletic participation available to them, along with all the social, academic, and health benefits organized sports provide. For example, in Chairman Jordan's home state of Ohio, the state legislature recently enacted a ban on transgender women and girls participating in scholastic sports competitions that match their gender identity, over the veto of Republican Governor Mike DeWine. This spiteful measure has the dubious honor of affecting virtually nobody in the state and being appallingly cruel to the few people it does affect. In 2023, there were only 6, count them, 6, transgender girls participating in sports programs for grades 7 through 12 out of 400,000 student athletes in Ohio at the time, a minuscule percentage of the population. And we know from reporting that none of those children posed a threat to the chairman and his allies. They just wanted to play in a team with their friends. We hear additional ugly stories from other Republican-run states. And unfortunately, my Republican colleagues here want to export that needless cruelty to every state in the nation. In short, this legislation is an unnecessary, bigoted, and frankly petty exercise of congressional power. I urge all members to oppose it, and I yield back the balance of my time.